Hello guys, and welcome to another exciting tutorial. First of all, I want to apologize for the delay in releasing the second part of this video. It's really been a very crazy couple of weeks for me, but well, good thing I finally had the chance to do it. So let's get right into it. So today we're going to be taking a look at positioning, in this mastering layout techniques. We're going to be taking a look at CSS positioning and how it works in Oxygen Builder. Of course, how CSS works in general, but specifically how you could use it in Oxygen Builder using the built-in settings. We're going to take a look at fixed position, absolute positioning, sticky position. We're also going to take a look at z-index, and if time permits, we're going to take a look at how you could combine this with CSS variables for a really robust layout. All right, let's start. First, fixed position. You may have seen a couple of implementation of fixed positioning. Okay, for instance, something like maybe the sidebar. If you have a sidebar on a website, it's fixed. Okay, so you have that sidebar to the side. An element with a position fixed is position relative to the viewport, which means it always stays in the same place even if the page is scrolled. So if an element is fixed, for instance, I'm going to duplicate this element, and let me just change the color to make it different. Okay, so let's say I go into the setting and I go all the way down to position and say fixed. Now you see it's fixed and it doesn't scroll when when you scroll the rest of the content. But now you have to define where you want it to be. So let's say we want it to be left 0, top 0, and typically this kind of positioning is usually used for maybe a sidebar, or it could be used for maybe it's a top element where it stays somewhere here. Let's say it stays somewhere, let's say 5 pixels from that, and then you have a smaller size, like say 60. Okay, so you have your to top there. Okay, all right, let's use that. Okay, so maybe you want to have your to top element here, scroll to top, you want to build something like that. Fixed position is always the go-to position, and you use that for sidebars too, like I've mentioned. For instance, if you take a look at this website, this from a theme called Aveda, so you see that you have this sidebar with a fixed position. So they're very useful for things like that. You could also use it for, let's say you want to place a call button on your website and you want it to stay one place just like this. You could use that for fixed positioning. So we really not going to go into fixed positioning that much in terms of use cases and examples, because it's kind of pretty straightforward. All you need to do is to place that element where you want to place it. So let's say you wanted to place this at the top, okay, left, and that's it. Okay, so if you wanted to stretch all the way down, maybe you could give it a height of say 100%, okay, and let's say a width of 299, and then you have your fixed position. So now it looks like it's scrolling, but let's place an element inside. As you can see, it's actually not scrolling, it's just this label that is scrolling. So if I have an element there, let's say I have my padding, maybe I throw in an image and I throw in a button, perhaps a heading. Okay, you can see that it's really not scrolling. Everything remains in one place while the whole site is scrolling. So it's very straightforward. So you could use this to create sidebars and all. Now, ironically, one of the most important use for fixed position is actually this, what you call the sticky header. And it's very ironical because it is called the sticky header, but funny, the sticky header doesn't use the sticky position, it actually uses the fixed position. Okay, so because it is fixed to the top, and then when you scroll it doesn't scroll. For instance, if you wanted this to be a sticky header, okay, you could make this maybe height 80 pixels, and then I'm going to take off those things there. Okay, all right, so you make that maybe the height, and then you make the width 100%. Okay, so you can see that this is just how a sticky header behaves. So what happens is a class of, the sticky class, actually makes use of the fixed position. Like I said, it's ironical. So so let me take this off, okay, and let's focus on the next one. So the next one we're going to be taking a look at is absolute positioning. Now, an element that is with an absolute position is positioned relative to the nearest position parent, the nearest position ancestor. So instead of being positioned relative to the viewport like the fixed position, so let me demonstrate that. Now, I know that a couple of you watching this already understand this concept, but I also believe that not everyone understands. Before we go into the use cases and how we could use this positioning creatively, let me start with the basics for the sake of those who may not understand. So okay, so we have an element here. I want to give it an absolute position, so I just go in to the layout. Okay, now I'm using a recorder workspace, so my interface might be a bit different from what you're used to. Just want to make the workflow faster so the tutorial wouldn't take too long. So so you could check out recorder workspace. I think I'll put a link in the description. And I'm also using Swiss knife and hydrogen pack for the shortcuts of adding elements to the page, copy and paste and all. Yeah, so all right, let's continue. So just go to the layout, absolute position. Now it's absolutely positioned, but to where? So for us to know where it is positioned relative to, let's just say top. Now you could see that it is moving all the way up to, is it the section? As you can see, it's moving all the way to be positioned relative to the section. Now let's just give that section a background. Okay, so you can see that. Now if I select this, okay, and then I give it a position of relative, so you see that absolutely positioned element is going to move to the nearest relatively positioned parent. Now if I select this and give it a position of relative, it's going to jump there, okay, to the first, the immediate parent. So now, so what it does is that it's positioned relative to the nearest positioned ancestor. Also, one of the things you have to take note of is the absolutely positioned element is removed from the normal document flow and can overlap other object, just like what you're seeing here. So now let's take a look at these positions. Okay, so what happens here is that, like, if we don't give any value, it's just gonna stay there, it's just gonna hang there. Okay, so now you have to define how you want it to be positioned relative to the parent. So if you put 0 pixel from the top, okay, it's gonna lap from the top. If you give it a 0 pixel from the left, okay, it's gonna lap all the way, it's gonna go all the way to the left. If you take that out, the same with the right, okay, and also the same with the bottom. Now there are cases where you want your absolutely positioned element to fill in the parent. Okay, in that case you could use up 0, bottom 0, left 0, and right 0. Now this is not moving the way we expect because I had already given it a fixed width. So I'm just going to take off that fixed width, and you can see that because of these values, giving it up, this 0 on all the 4 positions, it stretches it across. So if I take this out and take this out, you can see that it returns to the default size. Now another way to spread it across is by, if you don't want to use 0, 0, 0, okay, you could just simply go and write insert 0, and that does exactly the same thing, you know. So in what situation would you want to use this? You could want to use it, you know, if you want to have, maybe there's some kind of layout that you might want an absolutely position element at the background. So let's say I have this div and I need it to be, let's just give it a z index of 5, so it comes to the top. We will take a look at, you know, what you could use something like that for. Okay, all right, so let's just go back and remove that CSS. Okay, all right, and then I'm going to go back and set that to top right. Okay, so it's all the way here. So now remember that you could also position this element relative to the grandparent. Now this is position relative to the parent. Now if you want to do that, you're gonna have to turn off the relative positioning from the parent, and it's just going to jump to the next relatively positioned ancestor, which is now the grandparent. Now there are a lot of possibilities doing stuff like this, a lot of possibilities. So you could just imagine that this, you know, element is actually a child of this, but you can put it all the way up here. Imagine the kind of things you could do with it. You know, imagine the kind of maybe some creative hover effect you could do with it. Okay, for instance, you want to, you know, create a hover effect that when you hover on this, something at this corner changes. You could do that. And we're going to take a look at how we could use take this kind of feature, you know, solve an actual real life, you know, problem. Now let's take a look at this website. This is H&M website, okay, and this is a single product page. A couple of weeks back, I had a client request exact same layout as H&M. Okay, just needed something like this. I want you to take note at what is going on here. Now this is a single product page with 2 product images, okay, and then you have a gallery here. But take note as what is going to happen. Now if I reduce this at lower breakpoints, now you can see now we have this and this. Take note of this image and also take note of the first image here. Now once this goes all the way down, you're going to see that you have just only one image and the other image jumps back to the gallery. So how is that possible? How is it possible, you know, that this image can swap positions from here to here? So we're going to take a look at how that is possible. At first, you know, when I saw this, I thought, okay, this could be some real JavaScript, you know, thing. But it's a simple positioning trick. And let's take a look at that, how we can do that. Now, let me turn this off. Okay, I'm going to turn this off. I have a page that I've already set up, okay, to have a similar, you know, similar thing, similar layout. So right now, so I'm going to save this, and then I'm going to go to the front end and refresh. Okay, now I have a similar layout. So where I have my, say what you would call a product image here and a section here, not a section like a div here, and then you have the gallery. Now this isn't an actual gallery. I'm just using a couple of images, but the technique works the same if it is an actual gallery. Now, so what I've done here is that I've given these, all of them have a common class, gallery image, okay, and now I'm able to see my classes line up here because of Recorder Workspace. So in case you're just wondering. So I also have, yeah, I have all of them, you know, with this class. Then I also have the first image. I've given it a special class of gallery image first. And just for the purpose of, you know, making this image look okay, I've applied a class of object fit cover to them, where I've given, you know, the object fit cover and the object position center top. Okay, you know, I've given them a fixed height. Okay, so what I did was I gave it a maximum height, you know, of 800. So all of them have a max. So why don't I just, let me just change that to 750. And also I gave this a maximum height of 800. Let me change that to 750. All right, so we have that set up. Now, how do we move this image from here to here? Now, the first thing, you know, when you're trying to do something like that is the structure. You know, your HTML structure has to take into consideration what you want to do. So if I have a parent, okay, this is a section, then I have a div which is the parent to these three. Okay, now the image here is a sibling to this, and this is a sibling to this, and they all have one thing you want is that you want them to all have a common grandparent. Okay, a common grandparent. So what I did here was, now I'm gonna set this the grandparent here to position relative, because I want this image to be relatively positioned to the grandparent. Okay, now I'm gonna go to this image which is in this div, the first image here, and I'm gonna go to position absolute. Now see what is going on here. So it's that image is somewhere, and it's kind of, I think it's hidden somewhere. Okay, all right, this position absolute, let me give it maybe a right. Okay, oh, now I made a mistake there because I was still on the gallery image, so I'm gonna undo that. Okay, all right, so I've undone what I did. Okay, now let me select that again. I'm supposed to select this, the first one, then I'm gonna go in here and make it absolute. Now I've made it absolute. Now if you notice, now this has been taken out of the document flow, so the other image, this image has gone in here. So if I turn this off, you're going to see this image. Now we have to set now the next thing I'm going to do is to set the position. So let's go to the layout. Okay, I want it to be at the top, so you can see it's moving all the way to the top here. Okay, and then to the right, so you can see that moves top right. So let's see how that works out in the front end. So I'm going to refresh this. So you see that image moves all the way to the top out of the document flow of these other gallery images. Now I'm gonna just go all the way down here. Now you see what is happening here. Now at a very small break, at the lower breakpoint, you know, both images overlap. Okay, because this is absolutely positioned. So if I set display none to this, you can see that you still have this image here is just being covered by this one because this was absolutely positioned. But what you have here on this website is once you get to that breakpoint, that image is removed from that position back to this position. So what we're going to do is try and make that work. So all we just need to do is to, at that breakpoint, we want to undo what we did. So what at this, let's say this breakpoint, see this breakpoint. So what we're going to do here is we're going to take that image back to static, the static position, and then it returns. See, so it returns here, and that's just the trick. So I'm going to save this, and then let's take a look at the front end. All right, let's do that. I'm going to refresh that. So you see, I'm going to take this down. All right, let's watch. You know, don't mind this. Okay, this can be easily fixed. I'm going to take this, and once it gets to that breakpoint, it jumps back here. Okay, so this is the image, you know, jumps all the way back here. So how can we fix this? Okay, so what I said was that I gave that a maximum height. Okay, so let's fix that. Okay, gallery image is, instead of giving it a maximum height, I'm just going to give it a height. Okay, and then I'm going to give this a height too. So let's take that out, give it a height, and then that should solve that. So let's see. Okay, all right, so yep, that works. Okay, so that is one nice use case, okay, for absolutely positioning. There are a lot of other use cases. For instance, you could use absolutely positioned element for decorative elements. Okay, for instance, there are a couple of layouts like this. Okay, if you have something like this, now all these are absolutely positioned elements. I'm just going to briefly explain the positioning, you know, the actual positioning of the elements. Now let me turn this off and bring this back. Okay, now let's say I have an element like this, and then let me just duplicate that into two, change the color of this. Why do I make that sound when I'm changing the color? Okay, now I want this to be relative. Okay, All right, now the way this works is, now if you make this element an absolutely position element, and then these values, at first we're looking at, you know, 0 pixel, 0 pixel to the top, but you know, you could use percentage. And how does that work? Okay, now if you want to use percent, let's say you want to use 0% now, so it's telling you move the element 0% from the left. So you see 0% of the width of the parent. Okay, now this is really different from pixel, okay, because you're saying move it 0 pixel from the left, and it's just 0. If you say maybe move it 50 pixel or 200 pixel, okay, it's gonna do that. But when you want to move it in percentage, it's moving it relative to the width of the parent. So if you say 100, it's gonna move it 100% the width of the parent. You see, so if you move it 100 from the top, it's gonna move 100% the height, you know, 100% the height of the parent. Now let me take that out. Now if you move it, let's say you move it 50%, okay, now let me just turn this off and turn this off so we can deal with one. Now if you move it 50%, okay, it's gonna move it 50%, you know, across the width of the parent. And this is one of the things that confuses, you know, a lot of people, because it, you know, they think, okay, I want to move this 50%, so it should be at the center. I mean, 50% is the middle, but the truth is, it's actually moving, you know, it across, you know, the half the width of the parent. And you can see it has moved that distance from here to here. This is half of the parent. So you're not going to be able to move it to stay at the center just by, you know, giving it 50%. So if you want it to stay at the center, you have to consider that half its own width has to be accounted for, you know, and in that case, you have to go into the effect, okay, and you go into transform, and then you have to move it. You have to translate it in the y-axis, negative 50. Now, sorry, did I say y-axis? The x, that's the horizontal axis, negative 50. Now what you're doing is you're moving it back 50%, half of its own width, okay? So that's kind of like the difference between the percentage in an absolutely position element, okay, which is the 50% that you set for this element is actually the 50% of the parent. But when you go to this translate, this 50% is the 50% of its own width, so that counterbalances the effect, and you get this at the center. So if you want it to come to the middle, you know, from top to down vertically, you're gonna go in here and you're gonna set it 50%. Okay, now it has moved half the height, and then you go back there and then just take it up negative. Okay, so you can center this in this manner. Now let's go back to the website. We're going to be talking about sticky position. Now if you look at this, you have a sidebar that is sticky, okay, and then it stopped being sticky, and you could also see you have this bar at the bottom that is sticky here. So how do you do that? What exactly is a sticky position? Okay, now an element with a sticky position is positioned based on the user scroll position, and a sticky element toggles between relative and fixed. That's what it does. So depending, now it is relative, now it is fixed. Okay, now if you look at this, now it is relative, now it is fixed. It's not moving. So it actually toggles between relative and fixed depending on the scroll position. You know, it is position relative until a given offset, you know, position is made in the viewport, then it sticks in the place like position fixed. Now let me explain that. Okay, so let me turn this off and turn this back on. Okay, now let's say we have this layout that we have already done something with, and then we want to add maybe something like the side here, okay, and maybe the bottom here. So how do we do that? How do we, you know, make this stick at the bottom and then this by the side? Okay, now what we're gonna do is first of all create that layout. Now we're ready. So we want to have a common parent, okay, to all this. Like this is, let's say, this part, okay, and then so let's do that. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to wrap this with a div. Okay, so we now have a div wrapped around this initial div that we had, and then I'm going to add a div. Okay, and I'm just going to stack this side by side. So you have that. Now for this, we just want to make it 70%. Okay, and then this will take the remaining 30%. Okay, so I'm gonna just pop in maybe a heading, you know, a text, a button there, and I'm gonna just give it some padding. Okay, all right, and maybe, let's see, no background, but yeah, no background. Okay, now I have something like that. Okay, now I want this to stick. Okay, so we have a common parent. Okay, so it's easy for this to stick. So I'm just going to make this, let me just give it a color. Okay, all right, and let's see what is going on there. Okay, so the next thing is we're just going to go into the layout, you know, and as you can see here, you don't have the sticky position here, and for some reason I don't understand why, but why Oxygen decided to, you know, not to include it. Maybe because of how the sticky position works, you know. There are certain criteria that need to be met, so perhaps they just want you to put it if you know exactly what you're doing, because it really will not work in all cases, and you're going to wonder why is it not working. So the first thing you need to know is, for the sticky position to work, number one, you should never have the parent should not have an overflow property, like overflow scroll, overflow hidden. Okay, so I'm gonna make this sticky by putting CSS, okay, to it. I'm just gonna go say position sticky. All right, now you see, if we scroll, nothing happens. We have a parent here. Now for it to work, you know, you actually have to define an offset. Okay, so we want it, you know, top 0 once it hits the top. Okay, all right, so the offset is 0. If we want it to be maybe 20, okay, of course you need a unit for that, so it's gonna stay there. Okay, let's leave it at 0. For 0 you don't need a unit. Okay, all right, so now it is sticky, but let's see, what if we give the parent an overflow of, say, scroll? You see, now that sticky position is no longer working. So that is one of the criteria. Once you give the parent, you know, or the grandparent, any of the ancestors, if you give it an overflow property, sticky position is not going to work. Okay, so that is one of the criteria. Now the second one is that the sticky position, the parent must have enough height, okay, for it to, you know, enough scrollable distance. So let's say if this parent was let me select this. If I gave this, let me wrap this with a div, okay, and then you see it's still position sticky, but this parent doesn't have any height, so it's not going to stick because there is no scrollable distance. So let's say I select this parent and give it a height, let's say 800 pixels. So you see it's going to scroll up till, you know, until it reaches the bottom of the parent. So that is one thing you should keep in mind. I'm going to undo that, remove that parent. So that is one thing you should keep in mind when you are building, you know, a sticky positioned element. Now we've done this. Okay, we've done this. That is just basically it. But how do we do this one? Okay, how do we do this? Let's see. Now take note that this has to be a common parent to this. Now let me show you. Now this sticky position and this sticky position, okay, this one, they need to have a common parent. So how do you do that? So so that means you need another div that is going to be a sibling to these three, because all of them will need to be a parent. I mean, will need this as a common parent. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to add another div there, but you see we have this set to horizontal. Okay, so I'm going to make this 100% width, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to allow multi-line. Okay, so that is going to allow this to come all the way to the bottom here, and just going to give it a background color of white. Okay, maybe let me just give it something different for the purpose of the tutorial so we can differentiate it. So now we have these these three, and we've been able to achieve this kind of layout. Okay, so we're gonna give this a position sticky also. So I'm just going to go to the CSS and just write position sticky. All right. And then now for my offset, now let's go back here. For the offset for this one, what we had there was top, okay, because we wanted it to stick to the top. But this one, we want it to stick to the bottom. So we're going to use bottom, okay. So I'm just going to write bottom 0. So let's see. Okay, so you can see there that, this moves along. Now I'm going to bring back this section so I can have enough scrollable, yep. So you can see what is going on here. So I have my content here. So I'm just going to drop in maybe a text, okay, and just make that 32 pixel, okay, and then the text, just make it white. Okay, so you can see we have that, but once we go, everything goes up. So let's see that at the front end. All right, so we have this. Let's turn this off, and then so you see now what see the problem here is that it's overlapping here. Okay, now you see this, it does not you see, this is it doesn't overlap, this button. Okay, so that's more of a we just not need to give it a top a top margin. Okay, so we could just go in and give it a top margin of, say, maybe 50 pixel or something more than that, or 100 pixel. Okay, so yep, that didn't seem to work. Let's try something. It's not working. Okay, so what can we do? So what we can do is go to what if I give this a bottom margin? Okay, all right, that seemed to work. Okay, that seemed to work. All right, so that's that. Let's see. So you can see it's that overlap, it's not there. So we gave it a bottom margin of 70. Let's just make that 80. All right, so you see we have this layout. Okay, let's assume that we wanted to build something like this, and that's exactly what we have, where this scrolls up, and that works. All right, so we've been able to take a look at the sticky position, and in the process we have been able to look at the z-index. I mean, we haven't looked at the z-index, but that was when we were working on the absolute position elements. Now let's take a proper look at the z-index. Let's understand, because there are quite a few tricks, there are quite a few things about the z-index that a couple of people may not know. So I'm gonna take a look at that right now. Okay, let's take a look at how these positionings work with z-index, because there are a lot of things about z-index that a lot of people don't realize. So we're going to take a look at it and see some a few tips on how to handle issues that may arise when working with positionings, typically the fixed positioning. So I have a header here that I've set up. Okay, it's just a section with some information, and we have our previous design. Okay, so if we take a look at that at the front end, so we're gonna see that, you know, everything works as, you know, it should with this hero section. Okay, so what I want to do is that I want this hero section to be a fixed hero section where this other section scrolls over it. So what I'm going to do is I want to make it a fixed hero section. So all I need to do is just go to the layout, okay, and just make it fixed. And then don't forget, it's very important to give it this value of top, okay. And then I'm going to select this, and now I want to move this down so we can see it, but we have this section here, so we don't have the margin setting. So I'm going to wrap it with a div, and then I'm just going to make that div white, okay. Okay, and what if I make that section white, background color, you know, that div. So we're going to give that div margin, let's say 600. All right, so it comes below it. How about 700? Okay. All right, let's save that and then go to the front end and see what is going on. So let's take a look at the front end and see. Okay, so we have this, and then we're scrolling up, and then we're not seeing the color. Now look at, in the builder, everything looks good. You have this white background, but over here you seem not to have. So it appears that the fixed element is still on top of our section, even though the children are on top. So you have this weird behavior, and the reason you're having that is, let's see, if you go here and set the z index for this, then maybe to 5, okay, and refresh, it's not gonna work. Okay, so we go back to that section, that fixed header, and then we set the z index, let's say to 0, and then we refresh. So you see it's not working either. So what is happening now? The reason this is not working is what is known as the stacking context. You know, it has to do with, you know, the order in which the elements, you know, the HTML elements are stacked on top of each other, and then the positioning, you know, plays a very huge role in stacking context. So now the z index will not work, you know, without defining, you know, the position. Okay, in some cases where you have a fixed position, the fixed position will always have a higher z index than a static position, even if, you know, the z index of the static position number, the number you assign to the z index of the static position, is higher. So for instance, we see here that in this section, you know, this section has a z index of 0, okay, but this has a z index of 5, but it's still under it. Okay, now take a look what happens if we assign a position relative. So there are times you may have this kind of issue. You know, you're racking your brain trying to figure out what is going on, and you can't seem to know the problem because, I mean, you've set the z index, okay, just like you know, and then nothing is working. Some things are really, you know, under, and then when you have cases like that, you need to be sure that the element that you are trying to bring to the top, you know, at least has a relative position into it. If you're trying to get it above another element, you know, that is, say, fixed, okay, so you may run into that. So I just wanted to point that out. Next, let's take a look at CSS variables. Now you may wonder, okay, we're talking about layout, so shouldn't we be talking about grids, you know, and, you know, something like that? But if you want to be able to master layout techniques, CSS variables are priceless. Like, you really have to start getting comfortable using it. Okay, I just want to quickly demonstrate how powerful this can be. Now, first of all, what is CSS variables? You know, the CSS variables are custom properties that contains, you know, predefined values that you can reuse throughout your website. You know, so sometimes when websites are really complex, I mean, that's not the only use case, but sometimes when they're really complex, they have a very large amount of CSS, which, the values, you have to repeatedly use certain values, and you don't want to be writing them each time. So you want to store them in a variable called CSS Variables. So now let's just take a look at how it works. I'm going to drop in, a code block here because I just don't want to jump into style sheet right now. Okay. Alright, so I have my code block. I'm going to the CSS now. Before we continue, if you find this video helpful, please hit the like button. Subscribing to the channel will also ensure you get to see more useful tutorials once available. So go ahead and hit the subscribe button below the video. Thank you. Now let's take a look at this. We want to create a layout like this, okay? Where you have this box and absolutely positioned divs. Here we can see we have 3 divs, 1, 2, 3, probably another one here, okay? And in our example, I'd like to move this up here. So what happens here is that you have an absolutely positioned element here, and the bottom right corner, touches the top left corner of this one, okay? And this, like I said, I'm going to move this one up here, so the top right corner of this touch the bottom left of this one once we move it up here. And perhaps we just leave this out, okay? Now let's see how it goes. Let's just go ahead and do that. Alright, I'm going to turn off, I'm going to insert a section, okay, and I'm going to move that up here. Alright, so I'm going to turn off these two, and so we can work with this section. Let's move that to the bottom. Okay, now the first thing I'm going to do is to add a div, okay. I'm going to add a div, and then I'm going to add another div inside this div. We need 3 divs, okay, so inside this div, so I'm going to duplicate this, make it 3, and then for the parent div, I'm going to go and set a fixed width of 500 by 500, and then give it a background color to just, alright, so give it a background color. Now, for these 3 divs, I'm going to make them position absolute, okay? So first of all, let me give them a background color. So I'm going to give this that color, and I'm going to give that this, and then for this, so to distinguish them from each other. Now now to give them their width, okay, because I want them to have specific width and height, to give that, we're going to create CSS variables we're going to use. But before we do that, let me just change all of them to absolute position, okay? Position absolute, okay, absolute, alright, absolute, alright. So we want to make sure that the parent is relative, okay. Now for this, we're going to use this as this big one, okay. So what happens here is moving to the left, to the right, 0 pixel from the right. So we're just going to set it, 0 pixel from the right. That's pretty easy. And then this, for this, is going to move across 100% the width of the parent for it to be at this position. Okay, so I'm going to go there, and that is moving from the left 100% across the width of the parent. And this one, I said I want to move it up here, so it's going to move also 100% across the width of the parent. So let's do that. From the left, 100% across the width of the parent. Now, this is going to be 100% from the top across the height of the parent. No, that's not correct. So we're going to make it 0 from the bottom. Okay, so we'll make that 0 from the bottom. Now, to place this exactly the height of this, and to place this exactly the height of these two, we're going to create a CSS variable for the width and the height, especially the height of these two, divs. So I'm going to go to the code block, okay, and then we're going to write the CSS variable. The syntax is very simple. It's simply to dash the property name, okay, all right, and the value. So that is how the syntax goes. And to define a CSS variable, typically you define it inside a pseudo selector, okay, called root. Okay, so this is the syntax. And then to apply the CSS variable, you use the word var inside an open and close bracket, and then you place that property inside. Okay, so that is how, alright, so that is how you you call that variable, but this is how you define it. Okay, so for instance, we want the box height. Okay, so box height, then we want it to be 90 pixel. Okay, so let's just call this box height small, that is ace, and then we're going to define another box height medium, and then we'll make that 150 pixel. Now, because we're defining only the height, but I like this, I like to keep the aspect ratio, so I like the box to be the same height. So I'm just going to go and create a class called aspect ratio, okay, 1. And then I'm going to go into the CSS for that class and just write aspect ratio 1. That's all. Then I want to apply that aspect ratio class, okay, to all the boxes. The reason I'm doing that is once I apply the height, I want both the width and the height to be the same, you know, like we saw in the previous in part 1 of this series. So right now this is going to be my small box, okay, and this is going to be the medium box. So I'm going to go here to the width. Since this is readily available, I'm just going to type in that var box height small, okay, and then I'll change this to none. You can see that is applied, and because of the aspect ratio, no, that is wrong. I'm supposed to do that in the, you know, the ID. So we already have our aspect ratio set there, so I'm going to just place this in the ID. So that box is, you know, gets the aspect ratio, okay, even if we call this height, okay, but because we had the aspect ratio, so it's going to affect both the width and the height. And then for this, just going to select that. This is going to be the medium box, so I'm just going to paste that, but I'll change this to the medium M. Alright, and then this is going to be the small one, okay, I'll do that and paste that. Alright, now to move this from the bottom the same height as this, we're going to go into layout where you have that, and then I'm going to paste in the CSS variable for the box height small, okay, so it moves it exactly the height of this. And then to move this to this point, we have to calculate the height of these two boxes, okay. So to do that, I'm going to use I'm just going to use a notepad to calculate that. Okay, so I'm just going to copy this. The reason I'm using a notepad is let me select this. This space is not big enough for me to see what I'm doing. So you can see that once I added that calculated value, okay, so I'm calculating the box height, this one plus this one, okay, plus this, so it gives me that. So now you see, now this is dynamically controlled. So if I go in here and then I decide to change the small box, let's say I decide to change the small box to, let's say, 120, everything falls into place, everything adjusts automatically. If I want to change this to 200, okay, you see that falls into place. So you don't have to manually adjust this element, so you can place these things, you know, any way you want and change the size, and they will adjust automatically. So this is where CSS variables come into play in layouts. Once you start understanding and using CSS variables, you're going to overcome a lot of hurdles when it comes to mastering layouts. Next, let's take a look at before and after pseudo elements. When you are designing a website, you may want to add in content before or after the content of an element appears. So for instance, you may want to add an image before each bullet point in a list. So That's where CSS before and after pseudo element comes in. The pseudo element allows you to insert content before or after the content of an element. Now let's take a look at this. So I'm going to just take off this. Now we have this. Now one of the advantages of before and after element in creating maybe this same kind of layer that we just did right now is that it allows you to create with less number of divs. It can allow you to create decorative elements with less number of elements on your page. So let me go here. I want to add a content here to before, and then I'm going to add after. Now it might seem like, okay, these two elements are just together, but let me add a text element to this. Now you can see that the text, the before comes before the text element, and the after comes after. Okay, now if I select the original state and set this like that, okay, and perhaps I go to the text and then set the margin left and right. You can see so that the before starts before the content of this div, and after is placed after the content of this div. So now if we want to make these two, we can position these two just as if they were the children, okay, as if they were children of this div. Now let's go ahead and do something with the before. So I'm going to go to the before, and then I'm going to go here to size and spacing, and for the width I'm going to just give it the width of this var box height 8. Okay, I'm going to give that. Now I'd like to give it a background color, so we can see what is going on there. Let's just give it background color. All right, and then let's go back. Yeah, and for the height I'm going to give it the same. Now because I can apply a class to that pseudo element, so I'm just going to give that the same. Okay, so I'm giving it the same. Okay, so it doesn't look as if it's the same, but that's because the margin of this is pushing it against. But I want to make it an absolute position, so I'm going to go to the regional, okay, and change that position to relative. Okay, so it was already relative. Now I go back to the before, and then I set it to absolute, okay, and then I want to move it 100%. So you see what's going on there. And then for the bottom I'm gonna put in that height, the height of the small box. You know what, let's not do that. So I'm gonna take this off. Okay, so I'm gonna take this off and just give it 0 pixels to the right. Okay, and then from the bottom, for the bottom I can give it the height of the small box. And then for the after, okay, for the after I'm gonna do something similar. So first I want to give it a background color, okay, and then I'm gonna give it a width and a height, and then I'll change that to that is small, okay, and then do this. For the before I think we should make it the medium size. So I'm trying to replicate the same thing here using pseudo element, okay, and then for the after we go in here and we position it absolute, okay, and then we're gonna make it 100% from the left and 100%. Nope, not that. So make it like that. So you can see now that we still have the same layout but with pseudo elements. So we have just the div without any extra div inside. So if we go in here and for the CSS variable and change, let's say, the height of this to say 80, we still get the same result with the pseudo element. One of the tricks you could use a pseudo element to do is something like this. I'm gonna take off all this. Okay, I'm just gonna take off the pseudo. Okay, I'm just gonna delete that. Okay, I'm gonna delete that. All right. So nothing is there. All right. So now inside this section, okay, I want to have this div 2 of it. Okay, and I want this to be maybe different color, and I want to stack it horizontally. All right, and maybe center it. Now if we take a look at this, now what if I wanted this div to stretch all the way to the end? Now let me save this, okay, and go to the front end. Okay, now take a look at this. Let's remove this and this. Okay, so we can have just that. Let's save that. All right. Okay, so now we have this. Now what if we wanted this div to stretch all the way to the end? Now in Oxygen, if you go into the section, okay, if you go into the section and set this to full width, now what is going to happen is that that is actually going to stretch the way you would expect. Oh, sorry, now we gave this a specific width, which is what you don't want to do. Let's say you made this 100% and you made this 100%, okay? So both of them will take up equal space, and then because you wanted it to stretch, okay, now you see it stretches, but you don't get your side width, okay, like your contents will also stretch. So but if you don't have that as a full width, if you have that as a page width, you see the difference. Let's save that. So you see you have your page width. So what are you going to do if you wanted this this div to stretch all the way to the end and this to stretch all the way to the end, but still preserve, you know, your content? One of the ways you can do that is by using pseudo elements. So if I come here and I decide to use before, okay, I like putting something there to help me. I'm going to just give it a different background, okay? So now I want to place this absolutely, okay, and what I'm going to do first of all is to set my height of my absolute element, my before. I'm going to set the height to be 100% of its parent, okay, so, and then I'm going to go to layout and then make it absolute, and then from the right I'm going to send it 100% across, okay, and then what I'm going to do, the width, let's say maybe 50% of the parent. Now if I save this and go, now you can see that I have that, so it stretches all the way, okay, all the way to the end. So now I have that, so all I need to do is to take this color, okay, the color of the original. I'm going to take that and then give it the same color, and then if I do the same here, so what I can do here is instead of using before, I can use after, because it's going to be after the element, okay, and then I can give it this color of the parent, go back to after, so I'm just going to give it a color, alright, and I'm going to make the height 100% just like we did earlier. In this case I didn't put any content, so you can't see, but you're soon going to see it, and then I'm going to make it absolute. Then from the left I'm going to move it 100% across the parent. Now let's see, where is our content? Alright, so now even without the content, if I give it a width of, let's say, 50%, so you can see we can have that, then I'm going to refresh. So you can see now with this technique you can have elements, you know, you can have the heading, the text, a button, okay, let's do that, you know, an image. Let's not forget, okay, to go in here and take off this fixed height, okay, so, and just for the sake of a layout. Alright, so you can have all this, and then you still have your content will be inside within the page width limit, even though the background has stretched all the way. And you may wonder, what is the advantage of doing it? Can't we just have a section and then maybe use gradient to divide? But the problem is with that is you will always have to adjust the position of the gradient. For instance, If you're sure that you want it to be exactly half, that is no problem. But what if you come in here to reduce the width of this to say 30%? Okay, so your content in that area is 30%. So you will have to go into the gradient again to adjust the position. Okay, so this method is more future proof than using a gradient for the section. All right, so so now if I save this and go to the front end and refresh, so you can see, of course, I still have my before text there, which I forgot to remove. All right, you don't really need that. I use that just as a visual cue to see that that element is actually there. So my padding, the pixel of padding and all. Okay, so I did a padding and that shifted. So why it shifted is because we didn't set a bottom value. So I'm just going to set a bottom value. Okay, and of course, even if we did not set the height to be 100%, let's say we went in there and we didn't set the height to be 100%. Okay, but if we had gone into here and set the top, bottom and the top, we'll still have the same result as top and bottom 0. It's still going to stretch it. Okay, so don't forget to set that value, that bottom and top value, very important, because as you've seen, adding that padding, created a weird behavior, so you don't want that. So you see that is fixed. Okay, so that's all for this part. In the next part, we're going to build a project. We're going to go into building a custom header, and in that custom header, in the process of building it, we're going to see how to use the things that we have learned so far, the CSS variable, the fixed positioning, and we're going to do something really cool, and you would love it. So until then, have a great day, and don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Thank you very much.